B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Monday, March 26, 2018. On Saturday night, the FBI revealed to the lawyers for the widow of the Orlando Pulse nightclub shooter that the shooter's father has been an FBI informant for over 10 years. This is more dirty dealing from the FBI, and at the same time, the new FBI director has renewed the quest of St. James Comey to be able to crack your cell phone. First to Orlando, and we give credit to the scrappy indie media outlet Mint Press News, run by Manar Mohawish. Got a chance to meet Manar at the Project Censored event. I think it was about a year and a half ago now. But they do great work there, and I want to salute their reporter Whitney Webb, who broke the story. There's a brief mention of this same story in The Guardian, and at this hour I haven't seen a word about it in the Washington Post or the New York Times. So Saturday night, the FBI notified the lawyers for Noor Salman. She is the low IQ and highly suggestible widow of Omar Mateen. And Omar Mateen is the guy who reportedly shot up and killed 49 people at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando a little less than 2 years ago. Now we learn that the father of the dead shooter, whose name is Sadiq Mateen, has worked as an FBI informant, starting back in 2005 and up until the time when his son was accused of this shooting spree. Sadiq Mateen allegedly used his clout with the FBI to block a 2013 investigation into his son's behavior 3 years before the nightclub shooting. During that time, Omar Mateen's name was also removed from the no-fly list and the FBI terror watch list. Now, this adds a dimension to the stories that we heard about Omar Mateen's work as a private security guard on the grounds of the county courthouse in Port St. Lucie, Florida. And as I understand it, he was like a security guard at the main door, and then there are all these sheriff's deputies who, provide security for the courtrooms and the jail. And there was apparent tension between those deputies and the for-hire rent-a-cop, the role played by Omar Mateen. And when these rednecks got under his skin, he concocted stories about his ties to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State in an effort to brush them off and get them to back down. So we know that Omar Mateen had prior contact with the FBI, and they've always downplayed that and told us just not to look at that. Now it turns out that after the shooting, the FBI went to see the father, Sadiq Mateen. They found receipts of sizable money transfers to Turkey and Afghanistan during the early months of 2016, right up through June. He had also worked to raise up to $100,000 to reportedly fund terror attacks against the Pakistani government. And Mint Press News has a photocopy of an FBI document, and I am presuming this is what was shared with the defense attorneys on Saturday night. Sadiq Mateen was an FBI confidential human source at various points in time between January 2005 and June of 2016. During a consent search conducted on June 12, 2016, receipts for money transfers to Turkey and Afghanistan were found. The dates ranged between March 16th and June 5th of 2016. As a result of the discovery, an FBI investigation into Sadiq Mateen was opened, and he has not been informed by the FBI about the investigation. Now, we reported to you on Friday Glenn Greenwald's great coverage of the trial of this widow and how the confession that she signed was written by an FBI agent. She was held for 17 hours, and at some point she relented and signed a document that she knew was false. The FBI knew it was false, and they introduced it into evidence in the court trial anyway. This led to outrage from the judge, and at this hour, I haven't heard of the judge's reaction to this latest disclosure by the FBI. So the defense has asked the judge to declare a mistrial, and they are well within their rights to do so. If the judge doesn't do that, you'll hear me screaming bloody murder. So this is part of a pattern that we have seen. That many of these domestic cases of alleged terrorism link back to the FBI, to the 15,000 paid informants who are on the street trying to trip and entice certain suspects who are typically American Muslims into criminal behavior. And the Guardian, as I mentioned, has a 5 paragraphs, one sentence each. The crucial one here is her lawyer's federal court motion filed on Monday says prosecutors contacted them Saturday night and told them about the senior Mateen's relationship with the FBI. And I led with this story today because there are too many Americans, particularly those who call themselves liberal, progressive, Democrat, Hillary Clinton supporters, who now believe that the FBI is this just fountain of integrity and honesty, that they're there just to protect Americans. And it is stunning to me how many people who have shifted into that orbit. And in our final story today, we've got a commentary from Jeff Cohen that addresses that very topic. Meanwhile, the new director of the FBI is singing the same song as the old director of the FBI. Remember when Comey said that we got to crack this iPhone from the San Bernardino shooter? It was his work iPhone. They finally spent over $1 million to get somebody to hack it, and there was nothing of interest on it, at least not that anybody has reported. And so Chris Wray is the new FBI director, and together with Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, who is nominally running the Mueller investigation because of Jeff Sessions' alleged recusal, well, both Rosenstein and Wray are talking about how the FBI is in the dark. They've gone dark because these damn fancy smartphones have encryption that they can't hack into. They continue to push for a legal mandate that tech companies build tools into smartphones and other devices that would allow access to encrypted data in criminal investigations. And we know. We've heard scientists and technical experts from Silicon Valley say that this is a magic pony theory. The idea that we can open a backdoor to government that couldn't be opened by hackers. And the government would prefer that you have a device that could be hacked by hackers, whether it's Russians or Koreans or anybody else, than to be able to prevent them from grabbing data from your phone when they want to. So, New York Times, pretty good article here by Charlie Savage. They quote Susan Landau, Tufts University computer security professor. Any of the options people are talking about now would heighten the danger that your phone or your laptop could be hacked and data taken off it. Craig Federighi, I guess, Senior Vice President of Software Engineering at Apple. Proposals that involve giving the keys to customers' device data to anyone but the customer inject new and dangerous weaknesses into product security. Weakening security makes no sense when you consider the customers rely on our products to keep their personal information safe, run their businesses, or even manage vital infrastructure like power grids and transportation systems. So the idea that's being kicked around is for a system when you begin a call, all right, the encryption is enabled, and at the same time, a super secret electronic key would be generated, and it would be stored on your own phone inside a part of the hard drive that would be separately encrypted so that only the manufacturer, in response to a court order, could open it. But Professor Landau said that, among other things, police would want seized phones opened every day. Tech companies would have to staff up for a law enforcement crack-the-phone division. And this is fundamentally a violation of our Fourth Amendment rights. And listen to the silence in reaction to Chris Wray's demand. Have you heard any liberal member of Congress stand up and say, "This shall not stand"? No. Meanwhile, and I'm going to get into a wag the dog theory here in a moment, but today President Trump ordered the expulsion of 60 Russians from the United States. They've been given a week to pack up and get out of Dodge. And this is because Western allies are supporting Britain in response to, and this is a quote from the New York Times, Russia's alleged poisoning of a former Russian spy in Britain, end quote. Now, that word alleged is really important because in most news reports about the attempted poisoning of Sergei Skripal, it's already gone. Alleged, reported, reputed. It's just taken as fact. And I've got 30 questions. I won't list all of them, but I got 30 good questions about the Skripal attack that need to be answered before we could reach any consensus and have an evidence-based approach to blaming Russia and then punishing Russia for this. So the U.S. is falling in line behind Poland, Italy, Denmark, France, Germany, the European Union. Among the 60 spies are 12 identified as Russian intelligence officers who have been stationed at the UN in New York. We're going to close the Russian consulate in Seattle. That'll show them, won't it? And so the Times in the, 6 paragraphs down writes, those sanctions came as the U.S. joined Britain, France, and Germany in denouncing Russia for its apparent role. And the statements call it a clear violation of international law. So I'm glad to see the media inserting some of these modifiers that used to be standard. Before there's an investigation that concludes something that was alleged to have happened, you use the term alleged. You talk about suspects. But we've already seen Putin and the nation of Russia convicted in the Western Court of Public Opinion without a shred of evidence. And consider the source here. This came from Russia Insider, written by Rob Slane. 30 questions journalists should be asking about the Skripal case. Let me tick them off. I just highlighted about a dozen for you. Why have there been no updates on the condition of Sergei and Yulia Skripal in the public domain since the first week of the investigation? Are they still alive? Now, I've heard Bill Maher and many other people infer that they were killed and that the double agent is dead. And that's how far we have strayed from accurate reporting. If they're still alive, what's their current condition? What symptoms are they displaying? There is this problematic letter from Stephen Davies, consultant in emergency medicine at the hospital in Salisbury. Sir, further to your report, may I clarify that no patients have experienced nerve agent poisoning in Salisbury, and there have only been ever 3 patients with significant poisoning. But we are told flatly, this is Novichok. We know that it came from Russia. They're the only ones who make it. But there isn't a shred of evidence that's available to the public to support that. And for this doctor at the hospital there to say no patients have experienced nerve agent poisoning, isn't that a bit of a red flag for the corporate media? It's also been said that the Skripals and the detective, Nick Bailey, were poisoned by a military-grade nerve agent. According to some claims, the type referred to could be anywhere between 5 and 8 times more toxic than VX nerve agent. It seems likely that the particular type mentioned in the Skripal case should have killed him instantly. Do we know why or why not? Then there's the advice to the public in Salisbury to wipe down their clothing and their accessories with baby wipes. And the article asks, gosh, are baby wipes useful in clearing up a potential military-grade nerve agent? Initial reports suggested that Detective Bailey became ill after coming into contact with the substance after finding the Skripals on the bench where they were seated near this mall in Salisbury. Subsequent claims, however, said that he came into contact with the substance at Sergei Skripal's house on Christy Miller Road. Reports since then have been highly ambiguous about what should be an easily verifiable fact. Which is the correct account? Can the government confirm that its scientists at Portondown, the chemical weapons lab 12 miles or 12 kilometers, whatever it is, from Salisbury, have established that the substance was actually produced or manufactured in Russia? Why did the British government issue a 36-hour ultimatum to the Russian government to come up with an explanation, then refuse their request to share the evidence that allegedly pointed to their culpability? Does the fact that Iranian scientists were able to synthesize this class of chemical weapons suggest that other states have the capabilities to do likewise? Is the British government aware that the main plant involved in attempts to synthesize Novichoks in the 1970s and 80s was based not in Russia, but in Nukus, in Uzbekistan? I've never seen that city name before. It's spelled Nukus. Wow. Even on these shores, The Nation magazine, with a commentary by Mary Dejevsky, who is described as a columnist for Britain's Independent, unanswered questions linger over the Salisbury poisoning. They don't ask all 30 questions. But the reporter writes, it doesn't take much imagination to see a Russian hand behind what would appear to have been a botched attempt to kill Sergei Skripal and his daughter. Even if you accept that, however, the question is, whose Russian hand and why? And this question is as far from being answered more than 2 weeks after the event than it was at the time. Indeed, it could be argued that it is actually further from being answered because of the anti-Russia smokescreen that has been thrown up in the meantime. And she asks, or raises this point, the speed with which Theresa May has elevated a crime into something tantamount to an act of war risks two types of damage. The first is to the prospects of solving the crime, and the second is not just to the UK's relations with Russia, but allies as well. And even in this op-ed in the New York Times today, written by a member of a European think tank, Kadri Liik, Senior Policy Fellow, European Council on Foreign Relations, well, the author is no fan of Putin and has a litany of cases where it's alleged that Putin used a kind of plausible deniability, like the unmarked soldiers who were there on the border with Ukraine at the time when Russia took over Crimea. But get this. As the article extends the argument here of plausible deniability, the author feels compelled to say, Western concerns over Russia's interference in domestic affairs, which are blown far out of proportion. And, further asking about motive, the attempted murder of Skripal has made the situation even worse. Many aspects of this case remain puzzling. It's hard to understand why the Kremlin would want to escalate tensions with the West so intensely right now. But we're not allowed to look at those questions because we're being told that it's a slam dunk that Russia is responsible. No other party in the world could possibly be the source of this. And against this evidence-free backdrop, we are hardening tensions with Moscow at a critical stage. I find it bizarre. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And I want to thank Joe Clarici. He's been a longtime supporter and subscriber, and he messaged me over the weekend that PayPal had canceled his subscription without his knowledge. He's going to set it back up here in the next few days. And so I want to alert you to check on your PayPal account. because I've had an unexpected wave of cancellations, and I'm going to send out emails in the next couple of days to people whose accounts have recently been canceled. If you intentionally canceled it, don't feel pressured, okay? That's your right. But if it wasn't intentional, please let me know and reinstate it if you so desire. Let me thank Natalie Reel, Faith Peoples, Aidan McAleer, and Deborah Madera. They're all staunch supporters. Deborah just renewed her annual subscription. Thank you, Deborah. And if you're not a subscriber, you can fix that in a minute. Just go to peterbcollins.com, find the menu button, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber. You get to the sign-up page, and you've got easy choices to make for a subscription level that fits your budget. So 60 Minutes had one of its top-rated shows last night with Anderson Cooper interviewing Stormy Daniels and her attorney. And while we learned that Stormy Daniels says she only jumped Trump's bones once, she wasn't attracted to him. She kind of felt she got herself into a situation, so she had to screw herself out of it. That's her logic. But she came across as certainly telling the truth that she did have a sexual encounter with Trump, and that his efforts to smear her are what drove her to go public. So, in order to keep the story alive, which, of course, Trump denies vociferously, his lawyer, Michael Cohen, had his lawyer, Brent Blakely, write to Stormy Daniels' lawyer. And they issued a threatening legal letter, a cease and desist. And get this, they are threatening her with legal action because in the 60 Minutes interview, she reported an incident at a gym parking lot in Las Vegas where an unknown man came up to her and threatened her if she continued to pursue telling her story about Trump. So let me just recap. They're going to threaten her legally because she reported she was threatened physically. And I have to say, she had her wits about her because she said, well, she signed this non-disclosure agreement because she was told that if she didn't, they can make your life hell in many different ways. And when Cooper said who they were, Daniel said, I'm not exactly sure who they were, but I believe it to be Michael Cohen. I don't think that is liable or actionable on her part. That's my opinion. But the sad part is that Donald and Melania didn't watch 60 Minutes together because the comb-over flew back to the White House on Sunday afternoon from Mar-a-Lago, and Melania decided to stay for a week to spend Easter week in Florida with her son, their son. And so, this becomes a soap opera, and, you can certainly understand that this makes things uncomfortable for Trump and Melania. But it's hardly the first time. And while I think that Daniels was credible, what adds to her credibility is the stories that were told to Anderson Cooper on CNN on Thursday night by the former Playboy playmate Karen McDougal. Because she was jumping Trump in the same time frame as Stormy Daniels. All right, enough of that tawdry stuff. Now, my question. Is Trump actively wagging the dog, looking for any event or multiple events that he can use to distract us from these bimbo eruptions, as Bill Clinton used to call them? Well, we have the example of Trump announcing these expulsions of Russian diplomats today. There's a threat that he's going to fire the head of the VA, David Shulkin. On Saturday night, the U.S. military carried out its first-ever drone strike against al-Qaeda militants in southern Libya. Hitting Islamic State fighters was the previous mission, but now the attack Saturday killed 2 militants, later identified by a spokeswoman as belonging to al-Qaeda's branch in northwestern Africa. Deborah Jones, who served as U.S. ambassador to Libya, referred to Africa Command, saying, this appears to be the continuation of expanding AFRICOM activity in Libya's under-governed areas. Well, come on, it's a failed state. The whole nation is under-governed. But the U.S. did not announce these strikes as they have occurred in the past. So that could be a wag the dog incident. Also, I picked this up from IntelliHub and a guy who brags about how he is a contributor to InfoWars with Alex Jones. But facts are facts. Miami International Air Flight LL-162 landed at Langley Air Force Base during the wee hours Sunday morning and then flew to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And then it returned. We don't know if there was a prisoner on the plane, but Trump has promised to send new people to Gitmo, and maybe they found somebody and did just that. Today, over at whowhatwhy.org, you can hear my latest interview, this time with James Bamford, the acknowledged international expert on America's intelligence community. He's written numerous books, particularly about the NSA. And recently, Jim wrote a piece in the New Republic, which is kind of an overview and recap of Russiagate. And he and I don't see eye to eye on every issue. He believes flatly that Russia did hack the DNC. I am awaiting evidence of that. He also, in my view, linked weakly the indictments of the St. Petersburg Internet Research Agency people with the alleged hack of the DNC by some Russians. But where we do agree is that there's no evidence of how the information allegedly taken from the DNC reached WikiLeaks. And he considers that to be the critical part of the story. Here's an excerpt from my interview with James Bamford.
Like I said, as a person that's been doing this stuff for a long time, I don't have any doubt that they were penetrating it. The only question I have is whether they were the ones who actually leaked the physical or actual digital copies of the emails to WikiLeaks. I think that's the nexus here has to focus on that. I just don't see any evidence that that this was a leak from an insider who passed information on to somebody else through a flash drive who took it. I mean, it's not that hard to penetrate the DNC's computers. The security was very weak. I mean, even the Hillary's campaign manager, Podesta, had the simplest of access code. I think it was password 123 or something. So you're not dealing with, this is not penetrating the nuclear secrets of the United States. It's penetrating amateur computer people working for a political party. So I don't have any doubt that the Russians penetrated it, and they've probably been penetrating it for years, if not decades.
You can hear the full interview with Jim Bamford. It's available today, no subscription required, at whowhatwhy.org. And in addition to our discussion about the central narrative of Russiagate, Bamford is critical of the intelligence community, particularly the NSA, for losing or being the subject of theft of its hacking tools and the CIA's bungled attempts to regain control of them. He also is very critical of the hyped 24/7 coverage of Russiagate, and I think you'll find this a very interesting interview that airs out some of the critical parts of the Russiagate story and the manner in which it's being covered. Trump is recruiting feverishly for new legal help. As you know, last week his top lawyer, John Dowd, quit after telling friends that the president wasn't listening to his advice. And we learned over the weekend that Joe DeGeneva, the Fox commentator and Washington lawyer who has been publicly a defender of Trump against the Russiagate claims, he quit because he claims they didn't properly investigate his potential conflicts. And that's the first thing you do before you hire an attorney. So Trump is now left with a single attorney on the Russia case, and that is Jay Sekulow. And I don't know if you know much about this guy. He runs a scam nonprofit called the American Center for Law and Justice. He's made money doing religious freedom cases, and he employs his children. And together they host a radio show that is syndicated to the quasi-Christian political talk stations that are owned by Salem, a media company here in the United States. And I occasionally listen to their show because they brag about their connections to Trump and all of the enemies that he has, and they defend Trump against virtually everything. So it was Sekulow who announced that Genevo would not actually be joining the team, and Trump also last week tried to recruit Ted Olson, the former Solicitor General, who has a mixed record, but he, together with David Boies, carried the case that overturned the ban on same-sex marriage that had been imposed in California after many gay couples had been permitted to marry. So Olson is not all negative, and in declining the honor of serving as counsel to Donald Trump, he said, I think everybody would agree this is turmoil, it's chaos, it's confusion, it's not good for anything. We always believe there should be an orderly process, and of course government is not clean or orderly ever, but this seems to be beyond normal. I'm very proud of the millions of people who took to the streets on Saturday here in San Francisco, across the bay in Oakland, the Central March or protest in Washington, D.C., and we saw many articulate statements from some of the students from the school Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in Parkland, Florida, and I echo their concerns. And I hope this is a tipping point. I hope that they will make good on their threat to get registered when they become voting age, to register others, and to turn this into a real crusade. Because without a political threat at the ballot box, the NRA will continue to dominate most Republicans and way too many Democrats. We'll be watching this carefully to see how it pans out. I noticed on Sunday as I leafed through the front section of the New York Times that there were quite a few of these full-page advocacy ads. And since most people read newspapers online now, you wouldn't see them. So I just want to quickly review for you what was in offing if you read the print edition of the New York Times yesterday. There's an ad for the first responders from 9/11 in New York City, encouraging them to enroll for a special health program to to monitor and treat illnesses they picked up at from the debris of the World Trade Center. There's an open letter to McDonald's from a group of animal rights advocates asking them to order their suppliers to stop the factory farming of chickens. And because McDonald's is one of the major users of chicken product, let's see what it says here. Hundreds of millions of chickens are bred and raised each year for McDonald's chicken nuggets and sandwiches alone. As some of the largest animal protection charities in the country, we strongly urge you to address serious concerns about how chickens in your supply chain are treated. Then there's a double truck. That's a newspaper term for a two-page ad often in the center of a section. And this ad is dramatic because much of it is just black ink in both pages. But the text reads, "Dear President Trump, if you sign SESTA FOSTA into law, even Twitter will be affected." The title may sound good, but it isn't what it seems. If you sign this bill, every website will be affected. Free speech dies. Weren't you making America great again? So they're tweaking Trump, saying that if he signs this law, it might impact or impede his ability to spew on Twitter. But the more serious issue is that many lawyers at corporate-controlled websites will say it is too risky to accept third-party content because we can't vouch for its credibility and we might get sued. That is the real change in this SESTA law. And I hope Trump doesn't sign it, but I have absolutely no optimism that he'll do the right thing. Then there is the full-page letter of apology from Zuck. And this is the first time I've seen his signature You ought to work on that, Mark. Anyway, the headline reads, "We have a responsibility to protect your information. If we can't, we don't deserve it." And he says they're going to do better, all right? But that is a risky gambit to play, because the Federal Trade Commission is essentially opening a new investigation into whether Facebook complied with the consent decree that it entered into 7 years ago to protect users' privacy. That decree required Facebook to notify and receive explicit permission from users before sharing their personal information beyond the limits dictated by their privacy settings. And it appears that Facebook is certainly in violation. Now, a gilded invitation arrived at Menlo Park Facebook headquarters today, as Senator Charles Grassley, chair of the Judiciary Committee, invited Zuck to testify about privacy standards next month, and also invited Twitter chief executive Jack Dorsey and Google's top guy, Sundar Pichai. And there is a model now. Europe has approved a new privacy law taking effect in May that will give users of Facebook, Google, and other internet services more control over how their data is collected. But as we know, data collection is the fundamental element of the business model in Silicon Valley. Will you pay for Facebook if they promise you that they'll collect zero data? Well, I would. I'd pay $3 or $5 a month for that. Meanwhile, British investigators busted into the office of Cambridge Analytica in London late on Friday, looking to gather evidence of the data grab by Cambridge. And finally today, a couple of items from Consortium News, which is chugging along quite well, despite the loss of its founder, Bob Perry. And the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity have issued a new open memo to the president, calling on him to withdraw the nomination of Gina Haspel for CIA director. And the open memo goes on for, quite a few pages, almost 9 pages, detailing the reasons why a woman who was deeply involved in torture should not be made the head of the Central Intelligence Agency. And also at Consortium, a great piece by Jeff Cohen, who was working at MSNBC when the war against Iraq began, and he got fired. He had been producing Phil Donahue's show on that network. And he reminds us of what occurred 15 years ago and how many people who helped sell us the war at that time have been rehabilitated, like Barry McCaffrey, who was just on MSNBC last week. He wasn't talking about his bad advice regarding Iraq. No, he was talking about Trump's weird attraction to Putin. Cohen also talks about the repeat appearances by James Clapper, the proven perjurer, by the former CIA director and drone meister John Brennan, and his prior colleague, former director John McLaughlin. And Cohen really does a great job here of explaining that those who oppose the war in Iraq must be careful, because some of the same media outlets, some of the same voices, are trying now to sell us on a new war with Russia. And we should be equally skeptical. Thanks for joining me today for my daily news and comment podcast. It's available on YouTube. If you drop in there, click on the subscribe button. Doesn't cost you anything, but it will help me with YouTube. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.